The invitation she didn't get. I wasn't supposed to be here. That's what the whisper said when the Mater D, crisp in black and white, glanced at the clipboard and paused so long I could hear my pulse echo in the glass of the atrium doors. The conservatory at Ashridge gleamed like a greenhouse made for royalty. Every pane scrubbed, every chandelier swollen with light like blossoms of frost. Wind teased my thinning gray hair as if to nudge me back down the marble steps, away from the soft spill of violins, away from the scent of white lilies and champagne. "I'm Evelyn," I said. "Evelyn McCarter." A shadow of recognition flickered across his face, crease appearing and smoothing in a single inhale. He looked at me, then really looked tanned, stepped aside. "Welcome, Ms. Carter," he said, softer than the bow tie at his throat. "Congratulations to your family. Congratulations to your family." I almost laughed. No invitation had come in the mail with calligraphed letters spelling my name. No text with heart emojis. No phone call that balanced love and business, the way people do when they need you and don't want to owe you. Weeks ago, a polite, tired manager in a tiny back office, under a framed watercolor of peonies, had watched me slide a cashier's check across his desk. Anonymous. I had said a word that tasted like tin. No notes, no plaques. He'd nodded. What else was there to do? Some grandmother, invisible and stubborn, paying for a place in the sun. I stepped into the glass palace I had bought for my granddaughter. 1,000 fairy lights trembled on slender copper wires. At the far end, a ceiling-high wall of white roses climbed a lattice like a dream you could pretend was permanent. Lila, my Lila, had always loved roses. When she was 6, she'd tiptoe along the edge of my garden beds with her little arms lifted like a tightrope walker, whispering to each bloom as if the flowers needed reassurance to be beautiful. Ms. Carter, young woman in a headset, appeared at my elbow, her smile professional and warm. "We've got you at table 27. This way." 27. I followed her through a forest of round tables draped in linen so white they hurt the eyes. People turned and turned away. A school of silver fish. I knew most of their faces, aged versions hung with gold and polished indignation. Eyes that had once measured me and found me wanting when my husband's foreman's job dried up and the mortgage didn't tee. I knew the line of my son's shoulders even from across a sea of suits. The slope of my daughter-in-law's chin pointed like an accusation God had forgotten to smooth. "Here we are." The headset girl set down my place card with a delicate tuck under the charger, as if careful hands could make the humiliation kinder. Table 27 was a postage stamp behind a thick white pillar, half the room amputated from our view. We were by the service door, a sliver that opened and closed to spit out waiters with trays and glimpses of the kitchen's fluorescent realism. "I see," I said. "I'm so sorry," she said, color rising to her face. "We had some last-minute changes, and—" I touched her arm. "It's all right, honey. I can hear fine." Even through stone, she smiled back at me with such earnestness I had to look away. At the pillar, at the gold-edged menu that bragged about the evening we couldn't see. At our table, a smattering of people arranged themselves with the tentative choreography of strangers. A man in his 70s with a purple birthmark painted across half his cheek. A college-age boy with a cheap tie and a camera that looked like an inheritance. A woman with a toddler already sticky with frosting he'd found somewhere. The misfits table. The far away. I was their queen. I took the chair that faced not the couple's table hidden by the pillar but the service door, developing a private relationship with the clatter of ice and the gasp of soda guns. The first flute of champagne appeared like a magic trick, so fast I didn't see the hand that placed it. "Grandma." The voice snagged my heart like a sweater on a nail. I turned fast enough that pain shot across my neck. Lila stood there. Her dress belonged to a different world than the one that taught my fingers to count quarters in a grocery aisle. It fell on her like a slice of moon. Her hair was lifted and pinned with starry pins that made me think of the time she spilled glitter on my table and we found it in our hair for a week. Her eyes brown with flecks of green that came from nowhere I could trace softened when they met mine, and for a second nothing else existed. "Hello, honey," I said. She bent to kiss my cheek, fingers clutching my hand in a quiet squeeze that carried an apology I didn't deserve and couldn't refuse. "I'm so glad you came," she whispered. "I'm glad I found the place," I said lightly. The map on my phone tried to send me to the river. That app hates joy. She smiled, the expression she used to borrow sugar to make sunlight. Then her gaze flicked toward the head table, her face doing the math of everyone she had to be tonight. "I have two. They're about to line up. But I'll look for you." I nodded and watched her glide away. Michael, my son, stood at the head table with that rigid pride he wore like a uniform, the one that hid the little boy who used to fold himself into me when thunder got too close. Alyssa was a cut glass of a woman, all angles and bloom. Whispering to her sister with one hand covering her mouth in case the words had weight you could count. Neither of them looked our way. I didn't expect them to. We clapped when the wedding party sailed in, names announced in a voice that curled itself into a flourish like before a magic trick. We clap because we are told, and because clapping fills the spaces we don't know how to inhabit quietly. I clapped until my hands stung, and then I rested them on the damp linen, palms up as if I might catch something falling out of heaven. When the room settled and the green of the setting sun pressed itself against the glass panes, someone dimmed the lights and the violins softened to one gentle note held forever. The first speech began, tinny and distant behind the pillar. It might have been the best man. It might have been a stranger with a microphone at the Misfits table for all the difference it made. Laughter rippled in our direction and burst against the pillar like a wave. The toddler next to me banged his spoon with the confidence of percussionists and kings. His mother whispered apologies at me from behind hair the color of paprika, her eyes already wet with the effort of keeping both the toddler and the evening from collapsing. "It's all right," I said. "He's got good rhythm." The man with the birthmark was watching me. He had the self-contained calm of someone who had learned to enter rooms sideways. "Grandmother?" he asked, tipping his head toward the head table we couldn't see. "Yes," I said. "Yours." "Or mine," I said, and something inside me that had been pressed into a square shape for months, a year, the length of a lifetime, softened and dripped through the cracks. "My son," I added, because truth has elbows. "He is hers. And she," I swallowed. "She is my Lila. It's a good name," he said. "It is," I said, hearing my own name echoed when she was small. Lila and Lillian, the names in our family, curled like the stems of DS and GS on the recipe cards my mother wrote in a hand so firm you could hammer with it. The college boy slid into the chair one over from me, his camera clicking in quiet bursts like a mechanical insect. He wore the look of someone too young to know. He was beautiful and too tired to care if the world finds out. "Do you mind if I grab some shots from this angle?" he asked, already angling the lens to catch the light on the pillar and the spill of fairy lights beyond it. "Angles are all we have," I said. He laughed, not unkindly. "I'm Eli," he said. "I'm the groom's cousin. It's from the side that got the wrong email for seating." He gestured to the pillar. "I think they used the seating chart from the rehearsal dinner. Or maybe from a different wedding altogether." The spoon banged. Laughter swelled and broke on the other side of stone. The woman with the toddler pushed a crumpled napkin at the child, and he solemnly dabbed at his own cheeks with flourishes that would have brought the house down if anyone had been looking. "What's your name?" she asked me, and I realized I had never said it. "Evelyn," I said. "You can call me Evie." I answered to both and to "Hey you" if you say it nicely. "I'm Mara," she said. "And this is Theo, who believes sugar and velocity are the same thing." "Hello, Theo," I said, and he peered at me with the frankness of the very small and the very old, then gave me a grin that showed a slash of frosting across his teeth like a war stripe. The second speech began, or the first ended. It didn't matter. All speeches are the same, if the only words reaching you are laughter and applause, and the occasional tear you can tell is joy or grief. I lifted my champagne flute and watched my own reflection thin out along the curve of it. My face caught and stretched by glass until I looked like some gentle specter haunting the periphery. I thought of the check. The way my fingers shook, not from fear or from loss, though there was plenty of both, but from the thrill of doing something final. The amount had been more than I had ever seen at one time in my life. More even than when Thomas's settlement check came, the paper so stiff it could have cut my hand. One had taken all the years of not spending, the ugly, joyless discipline of being the one who says no, and I had converted it into a day. The mater d' who had taken the check had looked at me with a question he didn't ask, and I gave him his anonymity in exchange for mine. It's a trade older than money. He had said, "We'll make it perfect." And I had believed him because I needed one perfect thing in a life that had learned to survive on good enough. "Do you know what they're saying?" Eli asked after a while, tilting his head toward the pillar. "Sweet lies and true stories." I said, "They're the only kind of speeches people make at weddings. You say who they were as children to prove you knew them when they were ordinary, that all this shine is new. You say who they are now to make it all feel inevitable. You say who they will be, as if those words are a bridge they'll take one step onto and never fall." "You've done this before," he said. I smiled. "I've been alive a long time." "How long?" Mara asked, curiosity outweighing manners, the way it does when exhaustion and sincerity are holding hands. 17 years, I said. "And change." "That's longer than some buildings," Eli said. He wasn't teasing. He meant it with awe. "It is," I said. "It is." The third speech began. A cheer went up so loud it made the glasses sing. I pressed 2 fingers to my throat, where the pulse knocked politely. "May I ask?" The man with the birthmark said, "If it isn't rude." "Why are you—" He gestured to the pillar, and then, at his own face, an apology. "You seem like someone who should be in sunlight." For a second, tears gathered like conspirators at the corners of my eyes. My hands wanted to make fists. "People talk as if dignity is something you hold, like a purse, neat and zipped. They don't know it's a muscle, and sometimes it gets tired. My daughter-in-law has strong opinions about the aesthetics of families," I said, taking my time with each word like stepping stones across a stream, "and about old women who talk too much. I've been told I can make anything about me. Can you?" Eli asked, without judgment. He had the gift of asking questions like doors. "Yes," I said, and the answer did not shame me. "Because I am a human being, and I carry my life with me into every room." "Then carry it here," Mara said, sudden and fierce, as if she'd been holding the words back with both hands, and they broke through anyway. "Because I am trying to keep a little boy from throwing butter and a marriage from falling out of my mouth, and we need something else to hold." I stared at her. The room beyond us clinked and sighed. In the kitchen, a line cook told a joke that made the server with the bun laugh so hard she had to put down the tray or drop it. The fairy lights trembled at the air conditioning's breath. "When I was a girl, my mother taught me to sew. Always carry a needle," she said. "Not because you'll need to mend, but because you'll need to remember that everything can be pulled together, if you have something thin and strong and someone to hold the other end." She wore her thimble like a wedding band, and her wedding band like a promise to a god she kept arguing with and did not plan to leave. "Do you really want the truth?" I asked, looking from Mara to Eli to the man with the birthmark, and then to Theo, who had crawled under the table and was examining the underside of the linen as if it might be a sky. "Yes," the man said at once. "I want it. I want to know how people do this thing." "Keep breathing, okay?" I said. "'Kay?" I rested my fingertips on the edge of the table. I gathered my lifelike skirts and lifted it enough to step forward. When I was 9 years old, I learned the sound of a house dying. They leaned toward me, drawn like the tide. Eli's camera forgot itself and sat quiet. "It was January 1955, I said. Cleveland was a city that chewed itself and spat itself out as smoke. You could scrape from your lungs with your tongue. We lived in a brick duplex that let the winter in through every crack, So you learn to walk like a cat to keep your toes warm. My father drove a truck for a company that renamed itself every 6 months to stay ahead of itself. It was the year my mother realized the numbers would never love her back, no matter how carefully she wrote them down in her ledger. I could see the room while I spoke, as if cold glass were also a mirror that reflected the past if you looked long enough. My mother's kitchen, where the wallpaper tried to lift itself off the wall. The stove with only 3 working burners and one that flared like something out of hell if you looked at it wrong. The radio with its hum, like bees trapped in a jar. We had a coal furnace, I said, an iron beast in the basement that ate money in the form of black, shiny stones and gave back a heat that smelled like someone else's hands. That winter, we learned the word back rent. We learned the way a landlord knocks 3 times with his palms so you think it is a friend, and then when you open, you see his teeth and realize you've offered up your throat. I could feel the table listening. Behind the pillar, someone told a story about the groom in high school, and everyone laughed so hard I heard a champagne flute crack like a tiny bell. My father was a good man, I said. He was not a strong man. His goodness was the sort that folds a napkin before it cries into it. He would sit at the kitchen table after his shift, his knuckles raw, and he would add numbers out loud as if he could charm them by calling them by name. My mother, Lillian, held the world together with bobby pins. She'd pull out a tin from the freezer and say, "For emergencies," as if naming what was coming could delay it. The man with the birthmark smiled with one side of his mouth. They were not wrong. They were not, I said. But emergencies multiply. They are like rabbits. Eli passed me a glass of water, the lemon slice on the rim trembling. I touched it like a talisman. The landlord that winter was a man named Mr. Gooding, who was not. I said, he was tall the way a memory is tall. He always wore a hat that sat too low on his head, so you had to guess the expression in his eyes. He said, "You've got until Friday," and my mother nodded like she was in church and he was telling her what God wanted in exchange for breath. We didn't have it by Friday. That afternoon, the house made a sound that was a not sound to pause. The furnace choked. The radiators clicked like insects. And then the whole place sighed. It was the sound of giving up. I felt the same panic rise 50-some years later. A smell of iron in my lungs. My mother looked at my father and then at me. "Evelyn," she said, my name turned formal like an appointment. "Put on your boots." We went out into the yard where the snow had a crust you could crack with your heel. The coal chute door was bolted. My mother looked at it the way she looked at any problem too stubborn to move. She softened. It sounds backward, but that was her power. You could push at the world all day and nothing would budge. Sometimes you had to let it think it got its way. She took off her right glove and slid her hand down into the gap where cold had pulled wood away from stone. She worked the bolt with bare fingers until I saw the skin on her knuckles shine with wet. Then it gave. The door fell inward with a sound like a word the house had been holding back. There was a neighbor boy. Stanley Peterson. Do all boys named Stanley find mischief? Or is it only the ones I knew? Leaning on the fence, blowing smoke like he was older than 14. "What are you doing, Mrs. Carter?" he asked, half sneer, half awe. "Saving my life," she said. And the thing about having my mother for a mother is, you always believed her when she said a thing. "We stole coal," I said, putting my mouth around the word as if it could still get me in trouble. "Not much. A bucket full. We were careful, Lillian and me, not to be greedy. Enough to wake the furnace, not enough to bear witness against us." When we started back toward the house, my father appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face pale as powdered sugar. He said, "Lil," and my mother shouldered past him. A general with a bucket, as if the door needed a lesson in priorities. I smiled. I carried one shovel full. My hands burned and froze at the same time. It taught me something I never forgot. Sometimes the right thing is stealing. And sometimes the wrong thing is obeying. Eli's eyebrows went up, but his eyes were warm. The young bow their heads when truth throws a pebble in their pond and their reflection ripples. The house lived that day, I said simply. It lived enough that by Monday my father had pawned his watch, And my mother sold her wedding dress to a lady down the block who planned to be married in March. She cried over the dress and she said, "I never wore it. Not once. Not the way it was meant." And then she wiped her face, squared her jaw, and said, "Some things get to be beautiful more than once." She pinned up the hem with bobby pins and watched the other woman twirl in our kitchen, and I thought, this is what love looks like. It is practical and it bleeds. The server door slapped open and a waiter with hair like a field in wind staggered. A little with a tray of salads that looked like spring had been plated. He glanced at us, at my face, and without knowing why, he slowed down, listening as he moved, as if he could tuck my words between forks and make them part of the meal. "When I was 16, I met Thomas," I said, and the name struck the air with a clean sound that made my chest ache. "He worked at the machine shop with my cousin Benny, who said, 'Don't, Evie,' which of course meant I did. He had hands too big for his pockets and a smile that started in his eyes so that by the time it reached, hey, is his mouth, you felt like you'd been let in on a secret. Hay asked me to dance at a VFW hall where the floor had more splinters than smooth, and we slid together like we'd both been created to answer the same question. I did the thing girls do, I said, where I tried on his last name in my notebook to see if it fit. It did. We were married 2 years later on a day so hot my stockings felt like a punishment. We ate cake that a woman in our building baked in 2 pans that didn't match, and we smiled so hard our faces hurt. In the pictures, we looked like we'd agreed to keep a promise no one else could see. I could measure the room's breathing, even behind a pillar. People in love make the air warmer. I got pregnant fast, I said. My body took to it like a song it had been taught before it was born. And then, at 20 weeks, the song stopped. There are words for what happens when a heart that should be rapping on the inside of your skin with its tiny, confident fists goes quiet. There were doctors and their clean fingers and a nurse who held my hand with a reverence that made me want to live forever just to be worthy of it. There were sheets and the smell of bleach and the feeling that the world had betrayed me. Like a friend who talks behind your back so often, the walls themselves go mean. I went home empty and Thomas held me. Like a broken machine he desperately wanted to fix. For weeks I felt like a house after the party. Confetti crushed into the carpet, spilled wine in the rug. Silence curled in the corners like a sleeping cat you are almost afraid to wake. My mother came over every day and scrubbed the sink and said, "The world is cruel, and that is not a secret. The only trick is, don't let it make a fool of you for loving it anyway." My throat threatened tears. The water with lemon saved me again. When Michael came along 3 years later, I said, "And even his name was a bruise you pressed to see if it still hurts. I thought I had been given a second country to live in." He had a cry like a horn. It was a hungry, furious baby, determined to eat the world before it ate him. I fed him, and I slept when he allowed it. And I would wake to find Thomas standing at the crib. His big fingers so gentle, I once cried because mercy in strong men is enough to make you religious. Thomas got promoted at the plant. It was a raise we were grateful for and a shift we were not. Nights. He came home with oil ground into the lines of his knuckles like a manual to a life I could read but did not choose. He made the world safe for us, he thought, by giving up pieces of his body to machines that did not know his name. When the accident came, I said, and I paused because the past always steals a breath when it wants to come back through your mouth. It was not cinematic. No explosion, no dramatic hiss. A belt let go. A bolt found air. The machine that had eaten men in wider bites took a little piece this time. The piece that made Thomas walk without the confidence of a man who trusts the ground. His left knee became a map of pain. The company sent flowers and a man in a suit who said words that sounded like apologies and were not. "We sued," I said, and the man with the birthmark nodded, once, as if he'd reached that bridge too. A lawyer who worked out of an office above a hair salon took our case, because his mother had died young, and he said he had a hunger that justice sometimes throws bones to. We won. The check that came could have killed me. It made me shakier than grief. We put some away. We bought a car that did not have the habit of dying when asked to accelerate, and a fridge that kept things cold without freezing the milk. We paid off the balance at the hospital. He put the rest in an account with Michael's name on it. For college, Thomas said, his hand on our boy S. head like he was blessing him the way his own father hadn't. T. and Michael looked up with his angry baby eyes, and I thought life had shifted under our feet and we were still standing. Revenge is a word people don't use around babies, I said, but I felt it then. Not against a person, but against a machine, against poverty, against the landlords of the world and the radiators that sigh when they give up. I thought we took something back. We twisted the hand that tries to close around you and we turned it till it opened. The server door flapped and the smell of steak, and Rosemary made the Misfits table fall silent for a moment in collective prayer. I could hear the MC introduce the father of the bride. The room beyond us leaned forward. I knew what Michael would say when he stood to speak. He would say he had always wanted what was best for his little girl. He would say that from the moment he held her, he felt the world tilt, that every decision he made afterward was to keep his family safe. He would not say how you can hold safety so tight you crush the air out of it. He would not say my name. When Michael was 12, I said softly, he told me he didn't want me to walk him to school anymore, because boys on his block said I walked like I owned the ground, and that made them nervous. It's good. And then I stayed home and sewed his name into his jackets with stitches so small he didn't notice. When he was 16, he slammed a door so hard the frame cracked, because I took away his keys after he came home smelling like a lie. I told him, you can hate me or you can live long enough to say thank you. I don't get both. He stopped slamming doors. And when he met her? I said, and the door behind my ribs opened and closed. When he met Alyssa, he brought her to dinner and she looked at my hands the way some women look at the ground before they step in a puddle. I told myself not to mind it. I told myself she was young and a little frightened, and that fear makes you mean in tiny cuts you hope no one will blame you for. I made her my chicken with lemon and capers, and she picked the capers off her plate and left them in a sad green constellation. After dinner, she walked through my house with her fingertips, grazing the backs of chairs and the tops of picture frames the way buyers do when they can. Tea. Imagine living in a place and want to punish it for not being their dream. She gave me a candle on my birthday that smelled like a beach I had never visited. I said, She told Michael I interfered. She told me I was too loud, and then, when I got quiet, that I was manipulative with my silence. I tried. God help me. I tried to love her with both hands. I tried to be small when smallness was needed, and big when the moment asked for elbows. When Leela was born, I stood in a hospital hallway and cried joy until a nurse asked me to sit down, so my heart wouldn't gallop right out of my chest. Lila was mine, I said, smiling, not ashamed of it. You can share your blood and still feel ownership that is really stewardship. I took her to the park when the sun finally remembered Cleveland in April, and we climbed the slide together because the steps were slick and she was brave and I am not. I read her the same book 8 nights in a row, until I began to hate the book and love the ritual. I sang her to sleep with the songs my mother had hummed while breaking rules and bones. And Lila smiled in her sleep like a conspiracy that would one day save me. Mara wiped at her cheeks with the side of her hand. Theo had crawled back into her lap and fallen asleep, butter on his eyebrow like a signature. When the tuition statements started arriving, I said, laughing once, "This sound too brittle and bright." They didn't send them to me. I learned to read numbers upside down on Michael's counter while stirring a pot and pretending to count pepper shakes, like I didn't need both hands to hold back the urge to take out my purse and dump my life into his sink. I waited to be asked. When I was not, I asked myself. I sold my piano, I said, and this I did not tell many people. It was a loss that had taken years to name without falling apart. It was the color of a funeral and the size of an argument. I had saved for it with tips and coupons and the miracle of a church thrift store that did not know what it was selling. It sat in my living room like proof that ugly things could be companions if they made music. I sold it to a man who wanted a prop, which felt sinful, but he put his hand on it with such kindness that I forgave him. I paid what I could, I said. I learned the names of scholarships and the taste of their rejections. I worked 3 days a week at the senior center, and I braided the hair of a woman named Dell who said, I once loved a man in a hat so much I forgot to eat, and when I came to, I was 38 and so hungry I ate everything in sight, including my pride. I listened to the stories of those who had arrived at the same age, with different weather. I did not ask my son for thanks, not because I was saintly, but because it would have been like asking a bird to explain the sky. The room around us hushed. It wasn't just my table. The music dimmed and the microphone squealed as someone adjusted it. The MC called for attention. And now, the voice said, the bride would like to say a few words. I could hear the intake of breath from 100 throats. In the pit of my stomach, a small animal went alert. I saw Lila in my mind. The set of her shoulders when she stood on the diving board as a kid and dared the water to come meet her halfway. I swallowed. The lemon slice slid in my glass. Before she speaks, I said quickly, the urgency of it surprising even me. You should know the other thing. The thing about revenge. Eli blinked. The man with the birthmark leaned in so far I could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, carved by a life that had taught him to smile anyway. When Thomas died, I said, not the first time, when the machine made a home in his knee, but the last time, 11 years after we did every stay-alive trick we knew, and still the body said enough when he died. I was so angry with God, I thought my rage would leave marks on the church. I went to the plant. I walked into the manager's office. He said, Mrs. Carter, I put my hand up and said, no, you had your chance. This is mine. I took every photo of the men on the wall, the ones with smiles on their faces, and paper awards in their hands, and I sat on the floor and wrote their names on the back with the dates of the accidents I knew about. And then I walked out, past the receptionist who had a picture of a cat in a tutu on her desk, and I took those photos to the paper. I laughed, not kindly, remembering the editor with the breath that smelled like coffee and the hunger in his eyes that matched mine. They ran a story. It made a noise in the city for about a day and a half. It did not change the world. But for those 36 hours, the plant's name turned sour in mouths that had used it to impress people at parties. They sent me a letter by courier to tell me that what I did was slander. I sent it back with my husband's obituary paperclip to it. And then this is the revenge the landlord's wife from my childhood, the one who had watched her husband knock on door after door, sent me $50 in the mail with a note that said, for emergencies. I learned from you. I took a breath. Revenge, I said, softer, isn't always blood. Sometimes it's legacy. Sometimes it's the way the one who thought they were winning has to learn your name. The headset girl slipped to the pillar and peeked. They're ready for the bride, she whispered, as if I were the one in charge of time. I know, I said. I know. The microphone trilled. The room drew in, a heartbeat in a glass box. I closed my eyes and saw myself writing the check. On the memo line, I had written nothing. I had left that small space blank as if leaving room for breath. My grandmother, Leela's voice came, clear and steady, floating around the pillar like a bird finding its way. She told me once that a day can hold a lifetime if you hold your breath for it. I've been holding my breath all day. Let me exhale. You could hear chairs creak like knees in a church. She knew how to make people listen with the first sentence. She had learned that from me, and she had learned it despite me. I wasn't going to say this, she said, because I was told not to make tonight about money. A ripple of nervous laughter. The word money makes people itch. But we share what we have, and what I have is a story. I could feel Michael stiffen across the room like weather. I heard the clink of his ring against glass. A venue is a room made of glass and light, Leela said, and her words wove up into the glass like a ribbon. But a wedding is built on what isn't seen. It is paid for by hands you don't watch. It is carried by people who get set behind pillars and by those who believe magic is made with lists and sacrifice. Mom, she said, and this was for Alyssa, you have made beauty out of less and out of more. You have an eye that can find the bruise on an apple under the sheen. Dad, a pause, reverent and careful, the way you approach an animal that might bite. You've worked your whole life to make the floor under us level. I am here because of both of you. But tonight, I want to thank the person who made tonight possible. The person who paid for this room. It felt like the glass cooled by a degree. That's what truth does. It changes the temperature. Grandma, she said, her voice trembling now, the first crack in the day's armor. Evie. At table 27, a toddler snored softly into a mother's dress. A college boy forgot to take a picture. A man with a birthmark set his hands flat on the table, as if to hold it in place in case the world tried to tilt. Grandma paid for this room, Leela said. She paid for this light, for these flowers, for the way the night becomes a memory that will warm us when we are old and non-negotiable. She did it anonymously, because she thought she wasn't invited to this day. She did it anyway. The room exhaled. Not a sound at first, but a shift, a murmur, the ghost of repentance. Then so quiet I almost missed it, the sound of my name, murmured like a spell. Evie. And again, Evelyn. And then my son's voice, strangled and rough. Mom, I didn't stand. I couldn't yet trust my knees, those faithless hinges. I put my hand flat on the tablecloth as if the linen were a beloved face, Lila continued, and every word she spoke reached the corners of the room the way water finds the lowest place. There's more, she said. There's always more with her. She will tell you that life is a pocket you can keep pulling handkerchiefs from, and they are all different colors, and some have your name written in thread. She has held me up by the back of my shirt when I tried to step into traffic to chase a lost balloon. She has taught me that grief and joy are twins, and you get them both whether you want them or not. So tonight, before I dance with my father, I am going to go find the person who taught me to step. There was a rustle like wind through tall grass. The room moved and then stopped, unsure of itself, the way people do when a script has been torn in half by a loving hand. I breathed. The air came in and went out, and it tasted like metal and roses. I looked at Mara and at Eli and at the man with the birthmark. And I saw in their faces the thing I have been hunting my whole life, the generosity of strangers when given a story to hold. Footsteps approached, the sound of silk against glass and the small brave beat of shoes that hurt by now but were determined to deliver their cargo. Leela appeared at the edge of the pillar, bending around it as if it were a stubborn person she had learned to love anyway. She saw me, and she smiled the smile I had borrowed to live. Grandma, she said, kneeling, so we were the same height, because kindness is geometry. May I bring you into the light? I could have corrected her, child. I have been the light and the shadow and the one who flips the switch when everyone forgets. I only nodded. She took my hand. It felt like a rope thrown to a woman in a river. I gripped it like gratitude. You don't have to, I said. And even as I said it, I wanted to, and I would. I do, she said, and you want to. And we both know it. She stood, drawing me up. My knees made a complaint, and my heart made a promise to be faithful until the end. As we stepped around the pillar, the room bloomed. The fairy lights seemed to gasp. The flowers turned their faces. I know that's just something I imagined, but it felt true. Faces turned. Some of them were soft with apology. Some were stiff with pride, learning humility, a language it didn't want, but would wear eventually like a sweater it found it liked. Elisa's mouth was sharp and pale and then soft and unsure. Clemi Boyle looked like he had fallen and found the ground less forgiving than he'd expected. We reached the dance floor. The band adjusted their instruments with the careful dignity of men who know music saves lives, and Dante intend to be irresponsible about it. Lila brought me to the center. A spotlight didn't find us. I had asked for anonymity. The light had learned to be gentle. Speak, she whispered. If you want, you always have. I looked out at a room I had bought and had to be escorted into. I saw 100 stories waiting to be told back to themselves. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I had been proud of for its endurance, slip apart. I took the microphone, swarm from Leela's hand. It was lighter than the grief I had carried, lighter than the money I had counted, lighter than the secrets I had kept to keep a peace that did not ask to be kept. "My name is Evelyn," I said, and the room hushed with the intimacy.